Unit 3, Lesson 1, The Main Principles of Heredity. How are the hereditary traits transmitted from one generation to another? Genetics explains to us the existence of the similarities between you and your brothers or sisters, as well as the differences in some external traits. Hereditary traits, they are the traits that are transmitted from one generation to another. Acquired traits, they are the traits are not transmitted from one generation to another. Genetics, it assigns that researches the transmission of hereditary traits from one generation to another by studying the similarities and differences between the parent and the offspring. The scientist Mendel was the first founder of heredity because the scientific studies of heredity started with Mendel's experiments on pea plant. The reasons for choosing Mendel for pea plant: it's easy to be planted and grows fast, its life cycle is short, its flower can be self-pollinated, it has several pairs of contrasting traits, produces large number of plants in a generation, and can be easily artificially pollinated. Mendel's experiment to study the inheritance of the seed color trait of pea plant. Mendel chose a pea plant that produces yellow seeds and other pea plants that produces green seeds. Then he made self-pollination for these plants for several generations to be sure the purity of this trait. Mendel observed that the plants that have yellow seeds produces plants with yellow seeds, a generation after a generation. And also the plants that have green seeds produce plants with green seeds. Mendel planted the seeds pure yellow and pure green, and when they produced plants carrying flowers, he removed the stamen of these flowers to ensure that the plant doesn't self-pollinate. Mendel made cross-pollination by transferring the pollen grains from the anther of the plant's flower that produced green seed to the stigmas of the plant's flower, which removed their stamens and produced yellow seed. He observed that all the produced plants, which he named them the first generation, have yellow seeds, and the green-colored seeds trait disappeared completely in the individuals of the first generation. So Mendel called the yellow seed color is a dominant trait, and the green seed color a recessive trait. Mendel led the first generation plants to do self-pollination. He observed that the produced plants, which he named them the second generation, 3/4 are of yellow seeds and its quarter is of green seeds. The principle of complete dominance. It's the appearance of the dominant hereditary trait in the individuals of the first generation when two individuals are crossed. One of them carries a pure trait contrasting a trait carried by the other individual. Law of segregation of factors, Mendel's first law. When two pure individuals of any one pair of hereditary traits are different from each other, only the dominant trait appears in the first generation, while the two traits appear in the second generation at a ratio of 3:1. The dominant traits and recessive traits of pea plant which Mendel studied. Flower color. The red flower is a dominant trait while white is a recessive trait. Flower possession. Side is a dominant while end is a recessive. Seed color. Yellow color is a dominant while green is a recessive, and so on. Mendel assumptions to explain the results of his experiments. The hereditary traits are transmitted from one parent to the offspring by means of hereditary factors carried by gametes. Each hereditary trait is controlled by two factors, one of them from the father and the other from mother. The two hereditary factors of each trait separate when the gametes are formed, where each gamete carried only one factor from these two factors. If the two factors are similar or homozygous, so the produced trait is dominant or recessive, is pure, and the individual that carries this trait is called pure individual. While if they are different or heterozygous, so the produced trait is dominant, is impure, and the individual that carries this trait is called hybrid individual. Pure individual, it's the individual that carries a similar pair of genes, either dominant trait or recessive trait. Hybrid individual, it's the individual that carries a different pair of genes, one of them is dominant and the other is recessive. This is an exercise to explain the basis of genetic principles, the result of mating between two pea plants. One of them has a pure yellow seed and the other has a pure green seed. We use samples to explain the experiment of heredity. P for parents, G for gametes, F1 for first generation. And each trait, as we said, is symbolized by two factors, two letters. The dominant trait symbolized by two capital letters, as yellow seed is represented by capital Y and capital Y, while green seed, small y and small y. During formation of gametes, the two factors are separated from each other. And during fertilization, to produce the first generation, the first capital Y with first small y, and the first capital Y with the second small y, the second capital Y with the first small y, and the second capital Y with second small y. So, the first generation has yellow seeds. And when two individuals of the first generation are mating, the second generation is produced. Here, when the second generation is produced, we observe that 75% has yellow seeds, while 25% have green seeds. Second, study the inheritance of two pairs or more of contrasting traits. Mendel conducted a mixed pollination between two pea plants, one of a pure tall stem and red flowers, the second with a pure short stem and white flowers. Then he planted the produced cell. He observed that all first generation of plants had tall stem and red flower. Pea plant of tall stem and red flower is represented by capital T, capital T, capital R, capital R, while a short stem and white flower, small t, small t, small r, small r. During formation of gametes, capital T, capital R, capital T, capital R, and small t, small r, small t, small r. When gametes are aggregate to in fertilization process, they form capital T, small t, capital R, small r, and so on. So the first generation have tall stem and red flowers. Mendel left the first generation plants to self-pollinate, then he planted the produced seeds. Mendel observed that the second generation plants have different traits. Here the parents, tall stem and red flower, gametes of tall stem and red flower, individual, capital T with capital R, and capital T with small r. small t with capital R, small t with small r, and the second individual at the first individual. And then gametes are aggregate together, forming capital T with capital T, capital R with capital R, capital T, capital T, capital R, small r, and so on. When classification the traits of the produced individual according to the two pairs of contrasting traits, the results are tall stem and red flower 9, tall stem white flower 3, short stem and red flower 3, short stem and white flower 1. Finally, tall stem trait 2, short stem trait 3 to 1, red flower to white flower 3 to 1. Law of independent assortment of hereditary factors, Mendel's second law. When two pure indifferent individuals pairing two pairs or more of traits are crossed, the trait of each pair is inherited independently of the other and appears in the second generation at ratio 3 dominant to 1 recessive. The dominant and recessive trait in the human being. The ability to roll tongue is a dominant trait, and the inability to roll the tongue is a recessive trait. Free ear lobe is a dominant, attached ear lobe is a recessive. Curly hair is a dominant, straight hair is a recessive. Black hair is a dominant, light hair is a recessive. The chemical structure of DNA. The cell nucleus contains chromosomes. Chromosomes consist of DNA and protein. DNA carries the hereditary traits of the living organisms. Scientists have found that DNA consists of small parts called genes. They are parts of DNA present on the chromosomes and they are responsible for appearing the individual's hereditary traits. Model of Watson and Crick for composition of DNA molecule. The scientists Watson and Crick were able to make a model of DNA. DNA molecule is composed of two strands coiled around each other, forming a double helix shape. How do the genes perform their functions? The scientists Paddle and Tatton discovered the means of how genes control the appearance of genetic traits. Every gene gives a special enzymes. This enzyme is responsible for the occurrence of chemical reactions. Each chemical reaction resulting a protein showing a specific hereditary traits. So genes gives enzyme responsible for occurrence of chemical reaction resulting protein showing a specific hereditary traits.